All right. Well, welcome back to Credible Live. And we have a very exciting episode today. So, today in our episode of Credible Live, we're going to be exploring the rapid growth, innovation, and frankly, a major cultural shift around cannabis infused beverages. So, we're going to discuss this today with our distinguished guests. So, Paulo Sobral and Chris Fontes. These are, as far as I'm concerned, two of the smartest people that I know with respect to THC beverages, and that's really what it's about: is getting these folks that are really passionate about it, they're experienced, and we're going to break down where this trend is going and whether, is it a fad or is it a foundation for the future of cannabis consumption. So we're going to talk about a lot on this episode today around cannabis beverage, the Cannabev craze, if you will. But before we do, I'd like to ask Paulo to kick off and give us a little. He's been on our show before, so welcome back, Paulo. But to give us a little bit of and remind our audience of who you are and the great work you've been doing in the industry.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm currently CEO of Lolly Soda. So we've been in market since January or so, but I've been deep into the cannabis beverage space for about 6 years now. Was initial hire for Vertosa, leading company that supplies the emulsion that goes into the drinks. Since then, I've pivoted a bit, done some independent consulting, joined Can Social Tonics as we entered hemp, and now I'm here with Lolly Soda.
That's awesome. It's been fun to follow your journey and the great work you're doing. And another great guest and friend of Credible, Chris Fontes, who's the CEO of High Spirits. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Yes, I've been in the hemp space since 2018, and our company under the banner Trojan Horse Cannabis was the first company to figure out the Delta 9, we'll say loophole, though I hate that word, the Delta 9 loophole, and made the first hemp-derived Delta 9 intentionally dosed products, and shortly after that transitioned into beverage to launch High Spirits. On top of that, being at the forefront of this, understanding the category needs to exist, and regulations and legislation need to support the industry. I've been very active politically. Won't go into all the things I have done because it's too long to list, but I'm currently on the board of the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, and I'm the president of the U.S. Hemp Authority, and I'm extremely active with HBA, the Hemp Beverage Alliance, as well.
So when you say you've been active politically, that doesn't mean you're a politician, right?
No, not at all. No, it means I
conversation if he was.
Yes, it'd be a very different conversation. Yeah.
So thank goodness. But in this industry, we know that we need to be educating the politicians because, as we were talking about earlier, there's just so much misinformation out there. And it's important that the benefit of this beautiful plant really gets understood, and it gets done so by experts that are focused on quality and focused on safety. And that's why you're here, because I think we need to understand the big picture of what's driving this craze. We've seen these drinks popping up everywhere lately, and it feels like suddenly they're becoming really popular, and they are, right? So from your perspective, what's changed? Why now? What's making more people reach for these beverages? Is it about wanting healthier options, new flavors? I mean, what is really happening out there that's driving this very significant and meaningful growth in this industry?
Well, I think I'll go first. I think this is a miraculous plant, obviously, and it's got a lot of benefits to people. But if you think about the different form factors and ways of consuming, so to start, I'll just say I've been in the cannabis industry since 2016, before even my time at Vertosa, and I started in the medical industry here in California, working for a vape company. And just look at all the different form factors that were around back then. We had vapes, which is basically just concentrate that you inhale. Concentrates themselves that use extra hardware to get that combustion going. Obviously, flower, we combust it and inhale that into our lungs. All that involves inhaling foreign material into your lungs. That's just not approachable to people and offensive in certain settings. Like I can't do that in a fine dining restaurant. And then you had things like tinctures and edibles, which depending on the application, a lot of times were either medicinal, or in the case of lower dose edibles, that's like a 2-second experience. It's like a Tic Tac versus drinking a nice tea or a coffee. So I always thought that beverage was going to be the largest category in cannabis, not because it's the best way to consume or the most desired by the culture, let's say, but it's just the most approachable, versatile, and accessible. So with companies like Chris, when we had the USDA Farm Bill of 2018 that permitted hemp cultivation domestically, we had some entrepreneurs that started to put out Farm Bill compliant finished goods, even though we know the Farm Bill doesn't regulate that. And now just consumers have access to products that improve their quality of life or reduce harm in their life. And they're going to demand more and more access. And then now we've had some states that have set up state safe harbor regulations that allow commerce to happen at a state level, even though we don't have federal permissibility. So it's just been a lot of momentum happening over, let's say, like the last 7-8 years that got to this moment where now consumers have validated that they want these products in their lives.
I think to piggyback on top of that, that's all excellent points, and I second all of it. I think generally speaking, alcohol consumption is down right across the board, and there's a myriad of reasons for that we could go into. But I think a big one is just how it makes you feel, and not while you're drinking. Most people still enjoy that, but the next day, right? And sort of the long-term negative side effects of continued regular alcohol use. And so a lot of those folks that are backing off of that, we saw the rise of NA products because of that gap in desirability. And these THC drinks also sort of fit in that gap. It provides the same thing an NA does. It allows you to drink socially, but it gives you a little bit of a buzz, but we'll say an arguably safer or healthier buzz. And then I think another component that Paula just touched on that we should really probably push a little harder here is that cannabis beverages existed before we launched our products. They existed before 2018, before the Farm Bill, but they were never a significant portion of the cannabis market. If you went into a dispensary, you'd be lucky to find a beverage. And if you did, they weren't fast movers. And ultimately, the dispensary system is not physically, operationally set up to be performance driven in the beverage space. It's just never going to take off that way. And so I think, why now? I think the answer, all the other components remain true, all the cannabis formats, the lack of alcohol consumption, et cetera. But why now? It's accessibility. When you can stop at the gas station on your way home, pick up a bag of chips and a 4-pack of THC drinks, or you go to the liquor store and you pick up a fifth of whiskey and a 12-pack of THC drinks, suddenly this is approachable. It's the stigma of entering, I don't want to go into a dispensary because they're going to ask my ID and put me on a list, and now I'm going to be labeled a drug user by all my friends, right? But if you can just buy it at the grocery store or at the restaurant, the stigma's gone, and the accessibility allows wider acceptance.
Yeah, and I think the term that I've heard is what this California sober or the sober curious, right?
Yeah,
and we're seeing that as I was looking at a lot of the numbers, like millennials in particular. They're driving towards these healthier lifestyle choices, which obviously, to your point, includes this no alcohol option, because they're very focused on wellness, and nobody wants the hangover the next day. And so it's interesting. It's just amazing to me to see this change. But when I first started using CBD myself, like many years ago, I remember some of the tinctures that I would have, because that was the primary way that I was taking it. It was sort of like licking the lawn, right? I mean, it didn't really taste good. And I can tell you, like, a lot of people say that the cannabis drinks, the earlier ones, tasted that kind of grassy or bitter. And I know keeping these effects consistent is tough. So what are some of the ways, and you guys have some very cool products that actually taste good, they remain consistent. So how does that happen? How do you keep it consistent? How do you make sure the flavor and the effects are the same every time, no matter what other ingredients are in the drink?
Yeah, it's a great question. So working at Vertosa, we worked just in the almost 2 years I was there on probably 300 plus SKUs. And what's interesting about Vertosa is they're in-process supplier of a finished good, right? So they don't produce the finished good. So we had an ingredient, and that ingredient was the cannabis, the CBD, the THC, whatever cannabinoids are going into it. And we had to ensure that the product was potent to the point that it was accurate, the label was accurate, within 10% variance and the most tightest regulations we dealt with. So there's a lot of things that impact that potency stability. The base liquid you're in, is your drink high in polyphenols that cannot interact well with some emulsion systems? Manufacturing method, are you subjecting it to high heat through pasteurization, as an example? The vessel it's going into, some vessels have hydrophobic properties, obviously, to keep from leaching. So that can interact with the emulsion system. So it's a lot of trial and error initially. Now we have a lot of years of data to know what works and what doesn't work. With Lolly, it's a simple product to manufacture. It's just a soda. So the soda, 12 ounce can, we're putting probably 0.5 milliliter of emulsion, if less than that. So most of the components of soda that we already know how to make, everybody knows how to make soda. And now we're just making sure that the emulsion is stable in there. And to control against variables, we use craft brewers, and craft brewers have to come follow strict standards to ensure that the beer is consistent as well, because that's also plant material dealing with fermentation. So it's a lot more complicated than a Lolly to make it is to make a craft beer. So it just starts with good manufacturing partners who have a lot of experience and data. And now most of those problems have been solved, unless you're trying to do something that hasn't been done before. Then it's kind of the trial and error where you have to test it out, validate it, do long-term potency stability, which is painful, because if you want to make sure it's accurate 6 months from production, then the best way to do that is to wait 6 months and see what you test at.
Yeah, and I'm going to really double down on the partner portion of this. Everything you said was accurate, and we could talk about the technology of emulsion and how important that is and the different aspects there all day long, because that's really the clincher here. But the quality of partners is critical for making a consistent product. And it's been kind of difficult in the space. You know, you mentioned before about trying these products and didn't taste very good. And some of that was the emulsion. Some of it was the quality of partners. When you're walking into a co-manufacturing environment and saying, would you be willing to put THC into this drink? Early on, that was a tough ask. Mm-hmm. And so initially, a lot of people that said, yeah, I'll give that a shot, were also like, yeah, I'll give that a shot in between my batches of beer on the night shift, and we'll give it we'll see if it works, right? These weren't people that were set out to make THC beverages. It was an add-on. And so you're dealing with folks that, while well-intended, have no experience in cannabis, have no experience working with these types of emulsions, and it's just totally outside their wheelhouse. And so you end up with a supply chain system that maybe isn't as consistent or buttoned up as you would like. But as we progress in time, more and more folks have a lot of experience with working with THC, so it's getting a lot easier on the supply chain side. And another difficult component here in consistency is lack of standards and lack of real federal regulation at minimum, and state regulation in some states. Without standards, everyone can kind of do what they want, which makes it really difficult to have consistency by definition. So doing things like getting GMP certified, food safety certified, et cetera, or the USHA program that I run, getting that certification kind of ensures that you're dealing with individuals that they've been around the block, they know what they're doing, they've got standards, they're following processes, and they're intending on a good quality assurance system to ensure consistent product.
Yeah, and I think I could really relate to what you guys are saying, because what I'm drinking here, by the way, is it's not a THC beverage. That'll be later, but what I am drinking is like I know I've gotten off a lot of pharmaceuticals. In fact, I've gotten off all pharmaceuticals through the goodness of what God has already given us in these plants, right? Awesome. And one of the things is apple cider vinegar. I was taking in the form of gummies or actual vinegar, but now I drink it in a soda, right? And because I don't want to drink high sugar sodas, like it's terrible for you, right? But I'm drinking something that's like 25 calories, and it's a root beer, and it's got the actual apple cider vinegar in it. So what I'm relating to is the fact that this is a really socially acceptable and easy way for me to consume that, right? Like you were saying earlier. So this is what I think is a big reason for this, is it's another way of sort of replacing some of the bad alternatives, whether it's alcohol or whether it's just soda, these sugary, high caloric sodas. So, kudos for the R&D work that you've done, finding the right people to work with and making it so there's this emulsion stability, right? Because taking these things and putting it in something you actually enjoy drinking, and like I enjoy the flavor of that, and it works. So, I mean, great job in that, because it's got to be done right. And then, Chris, you talked about sort of the regulatory side, which we're all banging our heads against the lack of understanding and quite frankly the ignorance that I've seen going out there in the political side. Because what they do is by banning certain things just and throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? They're just going to create a bad, black market. What we really ought to be doing is focusing on federal safety, federal approval, federal standards. So let's just talk about that, because every state has different rules, and you guys have to deal with that. Like, wherever you go, it's not just, you're creating a root beer and you can sell it anywhere, right? Sometimes you can buy them at a liquor store, sometimes not. And the labels, doses, and everything, and the requirements are all over the place. So what is really stopping these drinks from being available everywhere? And why is it so hard for companies to make and sell the same products, across state lines? What do we really need to do to get these politicians and lawmakers to get their heads out of their rear end, so we can educate them and understand that this is what people want, and it's got to be safe. There's got to be standards. What say you guys about that?
I could take the next 4 hours probably. High level, let's start with the prohibitionist groups still exist. Reefer Madness is still alive. There's still a lot of funding, lobbying at state and federal levels saying no one should have access to this plant. It's killing people. It makes, as Henry Anslinger so eloquently put in 1933, it makes the darkies think they're as good as the whiteys. And this racist nonsense still literally exists out there. And it's unfortunate, but it's real, and we have to address that fact. So the Reefer Madness folks, the stigma, the old guard, so to speak, they're still around causing problems. 2 is political coverage. As a senator, you're always worried, if I say yes to this, who am I going to piss off that I need to do something for me next session or on this other bill? And so there's this silence in the room of everyone's guessing if it's okay to say yes or no to this. It is a real problem. Education. Legislators and regulators are not as educated as they should be, not through any fault of their own, but it's our job to educate them, and we haven't done a great job of that. And we're still working on that, but there's a lot of folks to educate, and they're busy people. They're touching one of, our industry is one of 700 industries that they impact through bill writing or through regulation rulemaking. And we're just a blip in the screen. And so to fully understand our extremely complicated category with the amount of time they're willing to dedicate to it, those two things don't match. You have corporate marijuana interests that were quite designed to function in not a free market. Their business model requires vertical integration, limited license, and choking out competition through negative cash flow, essentially. And those folks have spent years and years and years investing in their model, and being able to ship it through the mail or buy it at the liquor store completely decimates that strategy. I will say we're seeing more and more of these folks either jump into the category directly or at least passively say, we think this is a good thing for the entire industry. We support it, especially specifically to the beverage. So there's those components. There's lack of federal regulation and oversight. So there's tentative natures from big investors to jump in the space, large chain accounts. Target's not going to carry a 10 milligram THC drink until the feds say they can, right? So there's so many components here that are just stalling things out. And this really kind of epitomizes itself with the fight that's going on in Texas right now. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick kind of epitomizes all of these things: lack of education, big time reefer madness, spreading disinformation, being lobbied by groups that don't want this out there, and using it as a political bargaining tool to, in this case, destroy somebody else's political cover. So all of these things are rampant and existent, and you have to address all of them. If you can't just address one of them and hope the rest fix themselves, they don't.
I watched the lieutenant governor on TV, and I was just sitting there with my mouth open. Does this really exist? Today, really? And he's proof that it does. To me, it's just pure lack of education. And as you said, political bias. There's obviously an agenda there where he doesn't want to understand it. He's not going to understand it. He's just going to push the agenda. I was flabbergasted when I watched that clip.
I think there's a lot of intentional cognitive dissonance. Like, I'm going to refute new information that changes my core belief because it's part of my, I won't say religion in the traditional aspect, but it's a core central belief that this stuff is bad for you. So nothing you can say is going to change my mind, because then I have to reconsider who I am as a person. And go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to say that's a great point, because when I come up across people who I think are just set to believe what they want to believe. I don't know. The path towards change is arguing with that person. I think the path towards change is arguing to people, collaborating with people who want common ground. And even if they're not pro cannabis, to be clear, I was abstaining from cannabis the first 32 years of my life because I believed all the propaganda where we exaggerated the harms behind it. And it was when I really heard about kids that were treating epilepsy with CBD oil. And I said that this plant said there's no medicinal value, and there's a reason we make it a Schedule I drug. There's got to be something more behind it. And that's when I started researching the history of prohibition and uncovered some of that dark past that Chris talked about. But yeah, I mean, now going forward, if I try to predict what politicians are going to do or talk to the ones that are dead set on being wrong, try to talk some logic into them, that's just a quick path for insanity. So I know Chris and I have had some conversations with this. He's doing really important work with that. I think for me personally, it's just making more products that change people's perception of the plant for people that are willing to be open to the plant. And even if you're not, and you see the benefit it can do in somebody else's life by either getting them off the pharmaceuticals like you're doing, Brian, or helping them with some type of trauma that they haven't uncovered emotionally, then at least you should be in favor of adults having access to that. Nobody wants to serve kids synthetics or anything. I think we're all in agreement there. And there's a way, obviously, to sensibly regulate the plant. And we just got to collaborate and talk to people who are open to that.
Well, I have to tell you, into my 40s, I never used the plant, never touched the plant. I was biased against the plant. And, I'm a moderately conservative guy. I mean, I'm not one of these far right or far left. I'm kind of right in the middle, probably with most of America, by the way. So, we probably agree on more things in America than we disagree, but the right and the left and the far side pit us against one another. And this is one of those topics where, what caused me to change is I was, in a very stressful position, as been running companies since I was 32 years old, and, stomach problems, couldn't sleep. I was on lots of pharmaceuticals, and it was like, I finally one day said, what am I doing? And when I looked at it and said, the pharmaceutical industry is the largest lobbying power in the world, right? And there's a reason for that. So I finally just started doing research. And when I started doing research and educating, and quite frankly, when I came into this industry and started talking to some really cool people like yourselves that are not only passionate about it, but educated about it and really doing the right things, I wanted to learn more. And it really changed my life. And I have a loved one who has suffered with epilepsy. And this product has really tremendously helped. So, and it's tremendously helped me. But when I see the ignorance out there, all it's doing is standing in the way of safety. All it's doing is standing in the way of quality, because this industry is not just going to go away if they ban it. All right. It is going to go back to the black market. We're going to go back to the dark ages, and more people are going to get sick and more people are going to get hurt. And like, to me, like, isn't that common sense? It just seems so common sense to me. And that's why, and look, I mean, my religious belief is I'm a Christian businessman, and I believe that God gives you these things for a reason. He just doesn't want you, abusing them, right? So there's a reason the plan exists. That's what I believe, right? So,
and I think that's a good point you just made too about the abuse versus use and the effects that you maybe thought it was by buying into Reefer Madness when you were younger. You believe the propaganda, like Paolo said. The amount of people who are, let's say, north of 40 that I have either helped personally or watched or heard the story of them consuming for their first time, and they become high for the first time, and they're laughing and they go, is this what I've been freaking out about for 40 years? This is ridiculous. This is no big deal. Like, right. It's not, it's less intense than being drunk as far as, your perceptions skewment. It's not that big of a deal. They treat it, through the Reefer Madness propaganda like it's heroin. And it just isn't. It's more akin to like, it's an intense runner's high. Right. Yeah. Like maybe is a good way to describe it. And it's not this big thing that everyone makes it up to be. And the first time you get high, you recognize this is not a big deal. We're freaking out over nothing.
So we've got all these challenges. We've got these state challenges. We've got these federal challenges. How are brands really approaching, distribution and scalability and I mean, you've got to, it's like, you got to grow very carefully. What is the scalability approaches to really getting this out here, and because you can't just roll out nationally like you would, again, like a root beer or something. You have to have a very careful approach, and a lot of your fixed costs can't just get spread across every state. So there's sort of some issues you have here relative to building a scalable distribution mechanism. How does that work?
That's a tough one. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's a really tough one. So it works differently depending on your team, your resources, your goals, short and long term. For us, we look at a couple of things. It's where do we think is less volatile on a state level? We made a bet on Texas that might end up biting us there, so it's impossible to predict 100%. Do you have good partners in place? Just like we talked about with manufacturing, I think you need prime distribution and retail partners before you enter a market. And then the third component is, do you have boots on the ground that are going to live and breathe your brand and have knowledge of the local market? So we've just recently entered a joint venture with two other brands, Pamos Cannabis Beverages and Buddy Cannabis Seltzers, so that we can share those boots on the ground resources and spread the fixed costs across 3 brands to make it one portfolio. That also gives our distributors and retailers one point of contact as well. So that's how we're looking at it right now, but it's hard. I'm not going to pretend it's easy. Texas is causing a ton of chaos in our business right now, or the potential ban in Texas, that is. So even if you think you have a good plan, you got to be prepared to look at it every single month.
We joke that we're going to change our brand name from High Spirits to Pivot. Might just get tattooed on my neck, actually. It's tricky, in beverage, and Paolo really can speak more eloquently about this than I can because he's been in beverage way longer than I have. But what I've learned in beverage is the typical advice is go deep before you go wide. That means select a market and just control that market. Do your learnings. It's low cost because it's small. Keep it finite. Really understand it, work out the kinks, and then take what works and then spread wider and wider and wider, and then go hit another market, right? And I was like, I'm not doing that. And everyone thinks I'm an idiot, and maybe I am an idiot. But my experience wasn't in beverage. My experience is in the hemp industry. And I'm coming at it from if I put all my eggs in Texas, to Paolo's point, and then Texas disappears, my entire business is done. And so we did the total opposite, and we went wide and narrow, which is problematic for lots of reasons. So I'm not saying that this is necessarily the best choice. In fact, it's often touted as the absolute wrong choice. But from my perspective, we are not well capitally backed. We don't have a lot of investment. We've bootstrapped this entire operation. So I'm waiting for the cash conversion cycle to finish so I can up my inventory to get to the next step and deploy more marketing resources and this and that. So for us, if we put everything into one state and lost it, we would absolutely collapse. We had no backup. So it was better for us to spread wide and take advantage of this tiny window where I won't say it doesn't matter if you have boots on the ground, because it is not accurate, but it matters less right now in THC beverage than it does if I was trying to launch a tequila or a whiskey or something else that's well established that people understand, and you're fighting really hard for attention and shelf space. If you exist on the shelf, period, you are going to get some buy-in, because most consumers are in this, I'm going to test everything. New stuff's coming out all the time. There's not a ton of brand loyalty yet. So I'm looking at it as taking advantage of this window of time where brand loyalty isn't yet concrete. Everyone's trialing everything. So if you're on the shelf, you get a little bit of love no matter what. Distributors are excited at working with partners that frankly have their shit together and can just even produce a product consistently and get it to their door. Mm-hmm. And so we went wide to hedge against the regulatory uncertainty. And now that we've done that, now we're switching gears and picking the markets we're in to dive deep into to support those markets to get them to perform even better coming out of the demo stage of consumerism. So
there's the opportunity to sort of partner. And in your case, you've bootstrapped the brand and you've gone sort of wide. But what we're seeing like major alcohol and beverage companies that are starting to sniff around, this industry. So I mean, I think there's got to be some level for brands like yours that get out there and create that, get that shelf space, create that brand loyalty and recognition. I mean, just like this drink I'm drinking here, I mean, a woman bootstrapped this business, raised some money early on, and it got bought for, by Pepsi or Coke for $3.5 billion dollars. I mean, some crazy number. So I know that the alcohol industry is not going to sit there and watch their market share go away because of this new trend in the young people. So I would imagine that those partnerships, before they go all out acquisition, because they have to be careful of, okay, what's going to happen in Texas? What's going to happen federally? So it seems to me like testing the waters through these major alcohol and beverage companies is the way to go through partnership. Is that sort of like what you're talking about and when it comes to lining up with future partnerships?
Good, Paulo.
Yeah, so with alcohol specifically, since we have the 3-tier system, an alcohol partner has to fit in one of those buckets in most states. So they're either a producer, so they're a brand themselves, brewing or distilling or making wine, or they are a distributor. So distributor, they're just going to a store one time a day or 3 times a week, whatever the cadence is. And the more cases they have on the truck, the more revenue they're going to extract from that stop. So they don't really care what the liquid is, for lack of a better way to put it. They just want to drop off units and collect money on those units. Now, if you're a brand yourself and you're producing, then you're seeing a lot of those brands are just making their own THC drinks. So they wouldn't necessarily look to partner with somebody like us unless they just didn't want to deal with the regulatory headache and they just wanted to be a liquid producer, in which case they might do something like that. But I think most of the partnerships are with distributors and obviously the retailers. We're talking about non-alc. That's very interesting because we don't know where this is going to be fairly regulated, obviously. So before cannabis, I worked at PepsiCo, and PepsiCo, in my opinion, is a distribution company first and foremost when it comes to beverage. So they leverage their massive portfolio and they can lock in shelf space at retail and throw millions of dollars of innovation. And why that's important is because you can't pay for shelf space in alcohol, but you can in non-alc. So for those companies that are also typically publicly traded, when we're talking about really big beverage like PepsiCo, they're not going to do anything in this space until it's federally permissible. So they might be kicking the tires, but we're not going to see any activity until we get there. Alcohol is already obviously playing in it, and those partnerships are best with the distributors right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think we'll start seeing, cannabis drinks served right alongside beer and wine and cocktails at bars and restaurants and parties? I mean,
we're doing that today.
Yeah, it's happening now. It's not even to start seeing. It's happening rampantly. If you go to Minnesota and sit down at a restaurant, there's a 75% chance there's going to be a THC drink on that menu.
Wow. Because I guess what I'm reeling from is talking to some of the folks in Delaware, when I was talking to the Delaware Restaurant Association, when I asked them, are you serving THC beverages at your bar and, in your restaurant? And, the answer is largely no. So in some states it's happening, but I guess it's, to your point, I guess it's driven by how friendly the state is to the industry, right?
Yeah. And how long it's been around, how well it's regulated, if there's key stakeholders that are invested in promoting it. With Minnesota is a really good example of, if the common person understands it exists and they have access to it, the growth is rapid. The product category existed before Minnesota passed the regulations that capped these drinks down to 5 milligrams per serving, 2 servings per beverage. And we were in Minnesota for like a year beforehand, and it was a trickle. But what happened was they passed these laws and regulations, which actually further restricted the industry in some good ways with good safety regulations. That's important for public safety. But the media came out with the headline, Minnesota legalizes THC, which was kind of true, but kind of not true. But at the end of the day, the folks sitting at home watching the 5 o'clock news see this headline and watch a little clip that, oh my God, I can buy this at a liquor store. So now you have consumers going into places asking for it. This puts pressure on the point of distribution, whether it be a restaurant, bar, or liquor store, to say, okay, we get like 3 people a day asking for these products. We know they're legal because we saw the same headline. We should probably start carrying them. When it's less notable, if something passes kind of quietly and the media doesn't really pick it up, or it's still that gray area where it's technically legal but not regulated, everyone's more hesitant. Everyone wants to take a step back and wait for somebody else to be the first mover. So if you get shot in the back, it's not you, it's somebody else. And once that first domino falls, it's pretty rapid adoption.
I was having a discussion with a friend who is in law enforcement, and he said to me, "Why do you support these, like this cannabis industry and these drinks?" And I was a police officer, and I said, "Well, let me ask you a question." I said, "How many fights did you break up outside of a bar from people just drinking and getting wildly drunk?" He goes, "Oh, lots of them, like all the time. I mean, it was a big part of my job." I said, "When's the last time you did that from somebody consuming cannabis?" And he's like, "Well, I can't." And he goes, "I think I got a hug once." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Well, there you go."
That's why I support it.
I don't know. It just seemed to me, it was like very obvious. It's like, doesn't that make sense? But so we're already starting to see this now. We're seeing it in bars and restaurants. And so where do we go from here? What do you think is next? I personally believe that this is going to, all this political stuff is, we're going to see pockets of some bad states, but it's what the people want. So if it's what the people want, I mean, we got to give them what they want. So what do you guys think? What do you think is the future of this industry?
Well, I mean, I think it's the politics, and that once the politics sort itself out, then there's no stopping it. So since we brought up Minnesota, I think another state we should be paying attention to is Tennessee, because what happened there in Minnesota and Tennessee is, sure, we had the Farm Bill, and the Farm Bill is, I think we'll agree, is kind of murky when it comes to finished goods. We definitely know the intention wasn't to regulate finished goods. I'm happy people did that because now it gave people access to it versus waiting for federal clarity. But when Minnesota set the regulations, now you had big bars, restaurants, big distributors in Minnesota that felt comfortable on a state level to play in this category. And what Tennessee just did is they wrote clear regulations on a state level. So it's more stringent than Farm Bill compliance, but that at least legitimizes the category for a lot of people that are in adult beverages. So in Tennessee, you can only sell, come January 1st, you can only sell for an establishment that is only 21 and plus coming in the door. So that unfortunately limits us to liquor stores and bars, but it's better than an outright ban. And I think that's how you're going to get progress, is just more and more states setting their own hemp policy, a clear hemp policy that allows big reputable retailers, on-premise accounts, and distributors to play in it with complete confidence. And then the train's already left the station, so it's going to keep picking up speed the more of those wins we get.
Yeah, I think federal policy is incredibly important here, because 100%. some states take the approach, and legislators from those states take the approach, this is all going to get shut down in the next Farm Bill, so we should just ban it in our state now and move on with life and get ahead of the curve and stop arguing about it. And if they really believe that to be true, and if I was a legislator and I believe that to be actually true, that's probably what I would say too. Like, we've got enough problems in our state. This is going to go away federally, so let's just walk away from it now. Once federal stability in any form happens, and I mean literally the next Farm Bill, if the next Farm Bill passes and nothing changes, that inherently indicates a hat tip towards stability at a federal level, which will move the needle. So whether we get actual regulations or legislation, or whether we just do more of the same through the next Farm Bill, we're going to have some sort of federal stability that's going to allow states to start realizing this isn't going away. So you have to figure something out. Do you want to be the one state where no one wants to fly and engage in tourism in your state because you're a dry state in this regard? We've seen this in alcohol, and it's taken multiple decades for this to happen. But you have some states that are incredibly difficult on alcohol, like Utah was, where you couldn't have 2.8, nothing above 2.8 on tap. And the stigma is Utah's a dry state. You can't get a beer. So their skiing industry was impacted. And so because of the impact on the skiing industry, they changed their alcohol laws to be a little bit more normalized with the rest of the states. So eventually we'll see these wild disparity in states. Even if the feds say states do what you want, which they probably should do and probably will do, these states will sort of find a center ground where it's relatively common between states. And so consumers know what they're accessing, states know how to regulate it, distributors know what they're shipping, et cetera. And there's some uniformity.
Well, guys, I'd rather see regulation come out through the Farm Bill than from some spending and appropriations bill, which is, silly. I think that's all going to get stripped away in that current appropriations bill, because there's too many things they need passed out of it. And, at least in a Farm Bill, they're focused on it, right? And but there's been some crickets around that Farm Bill, so we'll wait to see what happens. But I always judge things on how investors look at things, right? And I can tell you the investors are very bullish about the ones I talk to as far as venture capital, private equity. They're pretty bullish around this THC beverage brands. So I think that's a positive thing that we see. But yet they're scared about all the other aspects of the industry. So I'm bullish on it as well, and I think it's going to be heading in a great direction. So guys, tell us how folks can learn about your brands and how they can gain access to it.
Go ahead, Paulo.
Sure. So we are for sale in, for now, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, and Minnesota, and Alabama. But you can also buy us online in over 30 states on lollysoda.com, and you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a direct message. We should be able to connect further from there.
Awesome. I love the branding around Lolly. It's very cool.
Thank
I've been
you.
following what you've been doing. Great job there.
Appreciate
How about
that.
you, Chris?
Yeah, and same for us, drinkhighspirits.com. If you want to engage with me on LinkedIn, I'm pretty active there, to some people's dismay, probably, because I like to poke the bear once in a while on LinkedIn. And Instagram, Facebook, and the like at Drink High Spirits. And we're in multiple states. I kind of appreciate that Paulo had that moment, like we're in Alabama, right? Because things are happening so fast. If you said, list the states you're in, like I'd probably go through a list and I guarantee I'd miss a couple. But we're in about 18 states right now and expanding.
Yeah, and what we're really hoping for in Texas is a veto, right?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Let's keep our fingers crossed that happens, and because I think that would be just such silly legislation if passed. So, and folks, Chris also talked about the work he's doing with the U.S. Hemp Roundtable. If you're not involved in the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, you need to get involved. And if you haven't looked at what the U.S. Hemp Authority is doing, which Chris is the president of, you should really look at that, because a good industry and a quality company doesn't wait for the government to tell them what to do. They get out there and they start setting the standards and they start following the standards. And the U.S. Hemp Authority has done a really good job at that. So get involved in that. Get involved with the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, because the work they're doing is about survival. It's about education. It's about keeping this industry strong. And they're doing amazing work in staying on top of what the states are doing. So there's a lot at risk, folks. And if you want this industry to survive, you want this industry to thrive, we have to get involved. We have to be advocates. We have to be educators, and we need to make it happen. So, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Always great to have you on the show, and we're going to have you back because things are changing every day. So for now, we'll say goodbye, but we're not going to say goodbye forever. We'll see you in the future. So thank you for joining us here on Credible Live.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Thank you.